200 years ago today, on May 5th, 1819, our Unitarian forebear, the Reverend William Ellery Channing, climbed into the pulpit of the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore, Maryland, and delivered a landmark theology-shifting, orthodoxy-shattering, highly heretical sermon entitled Unitarian Christianity. We also know it as the Baltimore Sermon. This was in the Unitarian branch of our founders, about a century and a half before Unitarians and Universalists merged their liberal religious missions in 1961. And don't worry, next year is the 250th anniversary of another landmark sermon from our Universalist forebears. And as one who defines her theology as primarily Universalist, I will most certainly be marking that occasion in the spring of 2020. This is William Ellery Channing. He looks young because he was young. And this is First Unitarian Baltimore. This is the same building that was built in 1812. The very same one, stands in the same place. They've added other buildings to the compound. This is the original building, and here's what their sanctuary looks like. So, William Ellery Channing climbed up in that pulpit back there. What you can't see is behind the photographer is a choir loft and a giant pipe organ. What we couldn't do with that, huh, Gail? Wow. Now, it's interesting to me that they kept the name First Unitarian. I know they did it to preserve their history because they are an historic building in Baltimore, in America, and in Unitarian Universalism. It interests me that they kept that name, though, because William Ellery Channing gave us one of the most popular names for Unitarian Universalist congregations all over the world: All Souls. There's All Souls Washington, D.C., All Souls New York City, All Souls Kansas City, All Souls Indianapolis, Chicago, Colorado Springs, Shreveport, Watertown, All Souls Waccamaw in Myrtle Beach, All Souls Miami, just down the road a bit, and many, many more, not least All Souls Tulsa, which is the largest Unitarian Universalist congregation in the world with nearly 2,000 members. Tulsa. All of them owe their name to William Ellery Channing, who declared, "I am a living member of the great family of all souls." This was an heretical thought in his time. For many today, it still is. And so it was in that great pulpit that Channing delivered his most crucial and famous sermon at the age of 39. On the occasion of the ordination of Baltimore's new minister of that day, Jared Sparks. Channing's own pulpit was the Federal Street Church in Boston, where he was ordained and installed at the age of 23, and where he served his entire life until his death at the age of 62. Now, his preaching was huge, but Channing himself was not. He was 5 feet tall and barely weighed 100 pounds. Now, a technical note on this sermon. Most of my messages run 1,800 to 2,000 words and roughly 20 minutes or so. On that fine Sunday morning 200 years ago in Baltimore, Channing's sermon was 14,000 words. And it took an hour and a half to deliver. And so, in the interest of honoring our history, I'm kidding. So why was I scared you for a minute? Y'all pack a snack? You know, in that day, ministers' quality was often gauged by how long they could preach. You want to go back to that? No. I love you too. So why was Channing's sermon such a big turning point not only for Unitarians, but for liberal religion in general in America. First, we got to understand the socio-religious context, the climate of the established church in the early 19th century. It was dominated then by Calvinist doctrines. Calvinist doctrines teach a God of fear and judgment. Calvinist doctrines teach that human beings are inherently sinful, that the King James Bible is inerrant and to be taken literally, that eternal salvation is limited to only a few, and that Jesus was of a dual nature, both God and man, joined by the Holy Spirit, which was also God, making of God a Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. A doctrine first conceived by the Roman Catholic Church in the 4th century at the Council of Nicaea, a council at which one of our own forefathers stood up. His name was Arius. He was a well-known theologian at the time, also considered a heretic. He rose up to proclaim the unity of God and that Jesus was a divine man and a fine example, but a man. He denounced the Trinity and was promptly excommunicated. They forbade him to preach. And so he went down into the streets and down to the fishermen's docks and sang his sermons. So do you think he's my favorite? Yes, he is. And it's because he went out and sang his sermons that we inherit that theology still to this day. Thus, we are not Trinitarians, but Unitarians. This is why in the early 19th century in New England, the name Unitarian was often used as a pejorative, often flung about as an epithet by Orthodox Christians to prove the heresy of Unitarian faith, to condemn and criticize religious liberals. Sometimes it's still done today. And Channing had had quite enough of that. And so when he took to that pulpit on May the 5th, 1819, he determined that he would reclaim the word Unitarian from those who would besmirch it. He would embrace its theology fiercely and loudly and proclaim it on his own terms. Now, in this sermon, he had two main purposes that he wished to accomplish, and it took him an hour and a half to get there. Let's see how we get there. His first purpose was to declare the use of reason in the interpretation of Scripture. The Bible, Channing preached, this is his quote, is a book written for humans in the language of humans and its meaning to be sought in the same manner as that of other books. We're still quarreling about that now. His second purpose was to lay out reason-based theological conclusions, among which was the renunciation of the doctrine of original sin, that is to say that humans were born sinful and can't do anything about it, rejection of the threat of eternal damnation, and the idea that Jesus' death was not a blood sacrifice in atonement for human sin, but a life that was the utmost moral and virtuous example for conscience and moral living. Boy, did he get in trouble. Orthodox Christians were already furious that liberals had taken over Harvard's seminary. Channing's sermon made it clear that the Unitarians would not cede the religious realm to those who preached human depravity and a vengeful God. Now, all of that is very important to who we are as Unitarian Universalists today. If you're curious, you can Google Channing's sermon and read it online for yourself, all 14,000 words. But while the teachings of the Baltimore sermon are theologically vital to religious liberalism in our own age and to Unitarianism in specific, perhaps its most powerful element is not in the meticulously presented theological conclusions of reason and of conscience, but rather in his closing paragraphs, in his charge to the young minister the end of that mammoth message. My friend and brother, Channing addressed the young minister, you are this day to take upon you important duties. We trust that you will bring to this work a willing mind, a firm purpose, a martyr's spirit, a readiness to toil and suffer for the truth. You will remember that good practice is the end of preaching, and will labor to make your people holy livers rather than skillful disputants. Be careful lest the desire of defending what you deem truth turn you aside from your great work. If any light can pierce and scatter the clouds of prejudice, it is that of a pure example. My brother, may your life preach more loudly than your lips. May your life preach more loudly than your lips. That brings me to a full stop every time. I have to ask myself, does my life preach more loudly than my lips? Does yours? All this year we have considered and reconsidered and committed and recommitted to living the way of love in our place and in our time. And truth be told, we get up in here all happy to be together and grateful to have found this remarkable faith. And we finish each Sunday determined to shine on in the world that light that we have gained from coming together in this beloved community to make the world outside these doors more like the life inside these doors. And then it's Monday. And then life takes over. And we mess up. And we hurt ourselves. And we hurt other people out there and in here. No matter how hard we try, that happens again and again. And then there's this other interesting thing. Unitarian Universalism does not ask us to repeat doctrines and creeds. It does not ask us to knock on doors or take responsibility for our neighbor's salvation. And so we don't. We eschew evangelism, when evangelism only means to spread good news. And by golly, isn't Unitarian Universalism good news? Hello, is Unitarian Universalism good news? Yes. Y'all can talk back. I love it. It is to me. It was life-saving to me. I don't mean from eternal damnation. I mean life-saving right now. What we have is life-saving. Right here and right now, for ourselves and for our neighbors. In body and in spirit. This world so stirred up and filled with noise that our bodies and our spirits can scarcely make sound, much less live loudly enough that our lives preach louder than our lips. In our own moment in history, not from some high pulpit, in some grand sanctuary, but in the everyday goings-on of our ordinary lives at work and at school, in the grocery store and the coffee shop and in traffic, and in our neighborhoods and in our own homes with our own families, both born families and chosen families, and in this place, our chosen family of faith. Let your life speak more loudly than your lips. We're mindful today that our Muslim neighbors begin the holy month of Ramadan at sundown tonight. During this time, they will give themselves to fasting and prayer and charitable works. Some of us will fast or partially fast with them in solidarity. A communal meal is called an iftar that breaks the fast of an evening. Some of us here from River Grass will be going to the Islamic Center of South Florida to share in that sacred time. My Muslim neighbors' lives surely preach louder than their lips. if in nothing else, in their devotion to prayer. 5 times every day. No matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, no matter how they feel about it. It's a beautiful thing to witness. We're driving through Italy last summer with our family, stopping for coffee at one of the roadside places. And while we were there, a family got out of their vehicle and spread prayer cloths on the ground and proceeded to pray together as the sun went down in the grassy median of the parking lot. Our 5-year-old granddaughter didn't even need to ask what it was for. She understood inherently and stopped and got quiet herself. I was moved and inspired to attempt a similar spiritual discipline. So I downloaded an app, a chime for the reminders to pray 5 times a day. It was going well until that chime went off at a very inconvenient and very public moment. And I am sorry to say I skipped that prayer, which made it easier to skip the next one and the next one, till I forgot to do it at all. It set me to wonder, what might Unitarian Universalism be like in this world? What might we be like in this world if we had that kind of spiritual discipline? How might we be as individuals, as beloved community, as a denomination at this time in history if we had that kind of spiritual discipline? That kind of letting our lives speak louder than our lips ever could. So let me ask you, ever check in on Facebook on Sunday morning when you get here? Let your friends and neighbors know where you are? Would they be shocked? Would they be startled? Do you ever share the announcements of things that are going on here? In person, in your neighborhood, on your social media? Let people know what we're doing here? Would your neighbors be startled? What if you invited them to just come with you? What if your neighbors already see you as a really kind, caring, generous, justice-oriented, loving person? What if they already see you that way? Would they connect that to your presence here? What if being a Unitarian Universalist was against the law? Would there be enough evidence to convict you? Or me? Or this congregation? "200 years ago, William Ellery Channing rose up and proclaimed the good news of Unitarian Universalism in the face of ridicule and condemnation and threats to his life, both bodily and eternally. In the face of great opposition, he preached the gospel of forgiveness and grace and good work, born of reason and reverence and unfailing love. He challenges then and now to strive to be holy livers rather than skillful disputants." And we need that message right now, because I pride myself on being a skillful disputant. To dispute and dispute and dispute and dispute orthodox, non-liberal ideas and people, because we know that the goal is being right. After all, 200 years ago today, William Ellery Channing changed the course of liberal religion on earth with a sermon. 200 years later, we are charged to do the same. My friends, you are this day to take upon yourself important duties. Be careful lest you desire, defending what you deem truth, that you turn aside from your great work. If any light can pierce and scatter the clouds of prejudice, it is that of pure example. My beloveds, today and tomorrow and the next day and each day hereafter, please let our lives preach more loudly than our lips.